Welcome to The Funniest Thing, where each week we share stories about how stepping out boldly always leads to better than expected outcomes. I'm Daryl Fazaro, and we're broadcasting. And we're sorry, folks. Hang on. You just heard our YouTube video kick in. We're streaming live on YouTube. So now, unfortunately, we get to hear that at the beginning if you're listening to this on any of the audio apps. But you caught me in the middle of letting you know we're recording live from middle school studios in beautiful downtown Culver City, the heart of Screenland. And before we get into today's show, I just want to thank everyone who's tuned in. We're glad you're here and listening. And especially if you're one of our Patreon contributors, we appreciate you contributing to the show. We've been doing this for over 13 years, and thanks to you, completely commercial free. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. No commercial interruptions. So if you like the show and you want to make a contribution, you can go to, and no contribution is too small and no contribution is too big. Just go to Patreon, Patreon.com. And in the little search bar, just type in funniest thing and you'll see our logo, and you could donate as little as $1 a month. That's half of a cup of coffee, and we'll be very grateful for it. Also, if you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, comment. You can even share it with a friend, especially today's topic, because it's something we're going to make extremely accessible that most people think is more complicated than it needs to be. It's the topic of meditation. And since our only marketing plan here at Funniest Thing is word of mouth, your spreading the word is greatly appreciated. Also, we love receiving your mail. You can email us at darylanded@gmail.com. You can go to our website, darylanded.com, and hit the contact button and send us a note, a question, or maybe a story that you would like to share that corresponded with listening to one of our episodes. We also really enjoy getting mail to our P.O. box. So if you want to send us a letter, a postcard, anything, we love receiving your letters and postcards, and we'll probably share them on the air unless you request that we don't. And that's at P.O. Box, Funniest Thing, P.O. Box 1312, Culver City, California, 90232. All right, the moment you've been waiting for. Today's topic. Even today's topic, and the reason our guest is here, has to do with what we're talking about yesterday. It's unbelievable how it works. And what we're talking about is the secret advantage nobody talks about, meditation. And our guest is Jason. I can't believe I'm Italian. I almost forgot how to spell.
You are not stumbling on my last name.
No, Napolitano.
Paisano.
Nap.
Napolitano.
Say it again.
Napolitano. It's the Americanized.
Napolitano. Of
There you
course.
go. There you got it. It's all good.
Well,
I have a friend that I have known for 25 years. He still calls me Napoleon. He cannot say my last name. He just calls me Napoleon. You got it. So you just like that. So
Napolitano.
Yeah, you got to get the hands involved. That's what happens.
So what I'm just gonna let everyone know with the highlights, a brief description of what you're gonna learn today, or what you're gonna be exposed to is, and Jason and we have both benefited greatly from meditation, but we all started at the same place. If you're new or never tried it before, and I just want to say, whether you want to become a better artist, musician, attorney, doctor, athlete, parent, or simply a happier, healthier human being, the advice is surprisingly consistent. Meditate. And in this episode, we demystify the misconceptions many people have about meditation. We share how simple it can be to practice, and we explore many of its scientifically verified benefits. A short list of these tangible benefits includes increased feeling of peace and joy, believe it or not, improved IQ and memory, enhanced coordination and reflexes, accelerated learning, greater creativity, increased confidence, and even looking and feeling younger and healthier. Most notably, and this is the benefit which I've come to appreciate the most, is meditation helps us tune into the superconscious, which is God's wisdom, care, and guidance. And when we're aligned with our source, we become aligned with our divinity, and miracles begin to feel like a natural part of life. And just to say his name again and reintroduce him, today's guest, Jason Napolitano, helps listeners grasp the simplicity of meditation through the powerful idea expressed in the title of his book. I love the title of his book because it says it all. If you can worry, you can meditate. So, Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here. It's always fun to do these kinds of things. And we haven't talked in a while.
Yeah.
So this is a nice way for us to connect and a nice way for us to talk about something important.
Well, I'm going to tell you, meditation is the direct meditation. Yesterday's meditation led to you being on the show today. Let me tell you why. This week, all week, I did not have a guest lined up, and we normally record on Saturday. So I had the idea, but it felt more like an intellectual idea, although it was a good idea, to ask a guest who's been on several times before, Kathy Norman. We're good friends. So I said, let me just ask her. But there was something, and this was, last minute on Friday, but there was something there that goes, she's probably not going to be able to do it. Like I had this intuitive feeling. And sure enough, later on that night, she said, I'm on a weekend, getaway. I won't be able to do it. I'm sorry. And I said, no problem. So yesterday I thought, I'll just take a week off. You know what I mean? Acceptance is the answer. I'm just going to roll with it. And I do my morning routine. And now it's already, the decision's made, the clock is ticking. I normally like to do these in the morning. I do my readings, I do my meditation. And your book, I'm going to hold it up to show the people who are watching on YouTube so you can see the cover. If you can worry, you can meditate, right? And it's a simple guide to meditation. So I can't believe this. I mean, the book is normally in my bookshelf with just the edge showing, and I can't see it, but for some reason, the book was out like this on the floor. And I was like, wait, you can worry. If you can worry, you can meditate. And something like this higher part of me said, you should just ask Jason if he'll be on. And I almost dismissed it. And that's the thing. I've learned never to argue with those hunches. So I just texted you. This was just yesterday to see let me just ask if you'd be on the show. And I didn't know we were going to, it was just like this. Let me just ask him. And we'll probably do it another time or something. It was because it was already Saturday. So my mind was like, it's not going to happen. But then you got right back to me and said, yeah, I'd love to. When? And I was like, something said, why don't we just do it tomorrow? Same time as if I did it on Saturday. Today we're doing it on Sunday instead of Saturday, if you're listening. Sure enough, sounds great. And I got so enthusiastic because I think even in my in my morning routine book as one of my, like, I call it the, after I do my readings and my meditation, I make my to-do list, which I refer to as my best attempt at what God's will is for me. And earlier in the week, guest for today's show. So it was back there. And this is another thing. During the meditation, I wasn't obsessing about a guest. It wasn't even on my mind. Like I didn't even go into meditation. Let me have somebody to be on the show yesterday. It was just the book, and you said yes. And I'm like, oh man. And this is what I mean. To me, these little miracles
Yeah.
are what I live for. And I was like, this is incredible. So, with all
Maybe
that
both.
being
Yeah.
said, with all that being said, why don't you just share a little bit about your experience with meditation and how simple it is to get started?
Sure. So first off, I'm glad that you kind of framed all that the way you did, because it gives, I don't know, I think it's good for us to remind ourselves to be in that flow of life and to pay attention to what's going on and so forth, right? So I'll kind of go back into to the beginning. One of the things with meditation for me is like one of my teachers told me originally that that prayer was us talking to God and meditation was us listening for the answer. And that really stuck with me. And so it kind of reminded me of that when you said, oh, you didn't really go in with any intention, but you wanted to have a guest and, and so forth. And you went into your meditation. And then it's like, okay, spirit moves and stuff happens and synchronicities unfold and like, oh, here you go. And recognizing those things, I think it helps us to create more of them, right? And so meditation for me, I'll kind of go back to my history a little bit in a second, but meditation for me is a way to stay in that flow and to pay attention to those everyday little miracles like you talked about. I love that idea. And so I think those small synchronicities, those little connections or serendipitous events or whatever, all that for me is miraculous.
Yeah.
And it's only when we stop seeing them that we think of miracles as being like, oh, someone's coming out of the sky and this is happening. And, you know what I mean? And we look for these gigantic things when literally every day there's crazy miracles unfolding like all around us. We just are normally not paying attention to them, right? So then meditation becomes the way, I think, to be mindful and to pay attention to those things that are going on. So that being said, we'll go back. So like my early story, it's like in the beginning of the book, and I think we talked about this a lot, and both of us share, kind of experiences in recovery and stuff. And I think you talk about that a lot in your work, right?
Yeah.
So when I really, I started meditating when I was like 12, and I had this really deep, profound experience that like opened me up. And it was a very strange and terrifying experience for a 12-year-old, but that kind of propelled me forward into continuing my journey, right? When I really, really went deep into meditation and started, I think, being more serious about it, I guess, because I always kind of had a practice from just really, I mean, this is where, so this is going to sound kind of comical, but I used to love Bruce Lee when I was a kid, and I watched the movie Enter the Dragon, and there's a scene where he's sitting there and he's meditating, and I'm like, oh man, if Bruce Lee does that, well, I got to do that. You know what I mean? So that was probably my big motivation when I was like 11 or 12. But then, once I started going through recovery, like it became this like lifeline to kind of keep me centered and to keep my head straight and to like work through all of the challenging stuff that was coming up and all of that. So I think that's where I like solidified a more formal practice. And then over time, I learned how to teach meditation, and I learned more about the sort of ins and outs and history and so on. So that's kind of the long and short trajectory of it. So yeah, so we find ourselves here today talking about that, and I'm sure we'll go into more stuff. But that's kind of a little background on me and my stuff.
Yeah, well, I like that it started off comical for you because this is the thing that makes it so accessible. Because even though it seems like, I like Bruce Lee, I saw what he was doing, so I didn't know what he was doing exactly, so I just kind of mimicked it. but it reinforces the truth that we're all wired to meditate naturally. It's uh, it's when we don't take the time, and I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression from either one of us that neither one of us treats meditation like a competitive sport, like somehow substantial lengths of time prove I'm a more masculine meditator than someone who meditates 5 minutes a day. I like the saying, there's a quote, just a few moments in meditation accomplishes more than 24 hours of busyness. And just these are some of the things I heard that made it attractive to me early on. That just trying to meditate is meditating. And it doesn't have to be a long period of time. Matter of fact, if you just want to get started, I recommend just set your timer on your phone for 3 minutes. And to help your mind get into that higher frequency, instead of just commanding that you do it in total silence the first time, put on, they have all these playlists on whatever your music subscription is, and just pick spa or meditation, and they're going to be very placid, and it's just going to be mellow sounds. You'll find many of them. Some of them even explain, like some of them are, they'll explain this is a meditation playlist, and these sounds tune you into certain frequencies. Pick that one and just turn it on at a comfortable level, and then hit your timer for 3 minutes. And that's going to be enough for you in the beginning. It's going to be more than enough, I should say. And this is what I like to equate it as. It's like in this day and age, we panic if we don't get our cell phone, if we don't charge our cell phone. I mean, we don't even think of not plugging in the phone at night. And we're the same. And we have a spiritual, like this is the way I put it. It's like I have a spiritual battery. And tuning into meditation, I mean, to be honest, I do a 15-minute, sometimes 20. But 15-minute, I get very comfortable. I know it's only 15 minutes. And remember, I always like to say, when we set the bar low, we set ourselves up for success. Because I could do 15 minutes at any time. If I'm getting bored or confused about what to do, I go, Daryl, you could just do a 15-minute meditation. Oh, well, yep, just do a 15-minute meditation. And I do the meditation, and then somehow I get an inspired idea to do something I wasn't even considering. So thinking about it like that you're just recharging your spiritual battery. And also, and I'm excited to hear I'm going to give you first a great quote from Rick Rubin. He's a music producer, award-winning music producer. He also wrote the book, The Creative Act, A Way of Being, which I recommend. And in there, he shares without the spiritual component, and he's actually talking about meditation and the combination of faith and love. So he says, without the spiritual component, the artist works with a crucial disadvantage. And also, we hear these Bible quotes, and as a kid, I never really understood what they meant. And, we could still get confused as an adult. But there's two great Bible quotes that correspond with what we're sharing on today's episode. One of them is from Matthew 6, verse 33. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. And if you want to read the whole chapter, Matthew 6, this is the one where, the disciples or the people listening to him are like, yeah, but what about, I got to work to make a living. How am I going to get clothes? How am I going to do this? And he understands that they're getting anxious. They're in that loop of fearful thinking. And he's trying to say, look, man, let's just tune in to God. And all these things will be added to you. You'll get the answer. Serendipitous things will occur. Know that you're supported, but meditation is tuning in, for me, that kingdom of God. Also, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Meaning, I know for a fact when I meditate, I am quicker to recognize recognize my intuitive ideas as being legitimate and acting on them, having the confidence to act on them. Even something seemingly as insignificant as your book showing up and me calling you, and look how it turned out. Because we get guidance, not just in the meditation, but like you were saying through the day. I want to say one last thing, and I'm going to let you, really go to town on all these ideas. But while I'm in the thought process, when I was putting together the book, I was talking to Jason before the show, the book Step Out Boldly, The Hidden Meaning of the Statue of Liberty. Okay. And it's all it's the esoteric meaning behind all the symbolism in the Statue of Liberty that you may or may not be aware of. And the idea was, the first idea was I was just going to use photographs from the Library of Congress that are in public domain of the Statue of Liberty, highlighting these different symbols. The symbols I'm talking about is the torch, it's in her right hand. The crown has 7 rays. Those aren't 7 points, they're 7 rays. Like, what does that stuff mean? And in the book, I go on to explain it very simply. But what I'm getting at is, I was telling a friend of mine who's a writer who knows me well, I think I'm going to use these public domain images because I thought that would add more credibility to it, And he said, what you got to illustrate it. And I doubted. I said, well, my illustration style isn't really like this serious looking style. He says, yeah, but that's what's going to make it great. And I was like, oh, all right, that's going to be a lot of work. But I would meditate on it in the morning to get the inspiration. I always do this in my prayers too. Thank you, God, for inspiring, guiding, and motivating me. Because that's the thing. We could get the inspiration and the guidance, but I need the follow through portion big time. So what happened was I was drawing each morning and things were coming out okay, but nothing was like, oh, this is fantastic. And the drawings were a little too on the nose, illustrative wise, too close to like what the Statue of Liberty actually looks like, which really isn't exciting for me. So I turn it over. This is what happened. I meditate in the morning. I went to do these drawings, and that was the time during that process. I go, these aren't really singing to me. Other people will think they're fine, but they're not true to me in here, that spiritual me that goes, yeah. Because if I'm satisfied, then it doesn't matter what anyone says, good or bad. I'm happy with it. I'm doing it for me. The audience is me, which is the healthiest way because it means I'm letting God work through me. So I listened to Hunch. Daryl, just stop today. You don't have to do any more. Just go on your normal walk. I do this walk in Culver City through a they renovated these studios, old sound stages, and that's where Apple has their new offices and stuff. So I just want to frame it so everyone knows this is like a clean, nice, like corporate, funky, cool, campus I'm walking through. And I'm walking, and all of a sudden I'm looking ahead. On the road, someone spilt green paint. Nothing around me is this color green. None of these buildings to this day have this color green on them. And it was the green similar to the Statue of Liberty. Not only that, it spilt in a way. I have the picture. I wish I could show it, but I'm not prepared. I don't have it up and ready. But just trust me on this. It spilt in an abstract shape of the Statue of Liberty holding up the torch. And as soon as I said, that's the shape, meaning that's the cover of the book is the shape of that spilled paint. Like it was kind of abstract. And of course, with my style of illustrating and collage, it became the cover now that's on the book. So these are all the benefits. I couldn't have willed that. If I relied on anything the world tells you about illustrating, keep hammering away at it, well, these are fine. Don't try, why are you making it complicated, thinking, but I knew I wasn't satisfied. It wasn't magical within. And now I know through meditation, that's the only part. It's like Shakespeare, to thine own self be true. And also, with meditation, you'll find that struggle is unnecessary in life. I mean, you could struggle if you want to, but it's unnecessary. And that's this little example I just walked you through was one of those moments where it went off like a bell in my head, like, holy cow, this is the magic. This is how beneficial meditation is. There's been many, many other stories, even like crazy stories, but this is just a clear one I could share today on the episode. So go ahead, Jason.
I mean, there's so much there. I could go on. So
Good.
let me just kind of start with what you just last said, because that's the most recent. It's stuck in my head. But I think recognizing and kind of seeing, like, I guess one of the things that I think is huge is recognizing and seeing the interconnected nature of everything, the creativity of the universe that's unfolding. And I think that's another one of the things that a practice of meditation. I look at it in two ways. One, there's meditation sort of proper, where I would say like that's you're sitting down, you're practicing in some way or another. Like you said, it doesn't need to be something that you're stressed out about. It doesn't need to be something that is like a marathon session where you're trying to outdo the monks in the Himalayas or something. Whatever. It's however you kind of work it out, but it's setting aside a little bit of time for yourself to go within. Like Yogananda put it this way, and I thought it was really cool. Like 99% of the time, the searchlight of our consciousness is directed outward. Why don't you take some time and turn that searchlight inward? And when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's so huge. And then, when you think about it like that, it's not so much about which practice it is. Like Daryl, you suggested, you can just sit for 3 minutes and try to keep silent. Another one that's good, if you don't have your phone with you don't want your phone with you don't want to listen to music, concentrate on your breathing, just watching the breath go in and out. That's a mindfulness practice. And you could even say something like, I recognize I'm breathing in, I recognize I'm breathing out. And it just helps you to focus that constant stream of distracting thoughts, right? So in a way, these days especially, our mind operates a lot like the world that we inhabit, right? So it's like so much of the time we're like on this thing and we're on a computer, and some of it is just, it's amazing, like the work that we're doing here, like podcasts that are going deep into things that are good for your creativity and your spirit and so on. And some of it is downright distracting and negative, right? And so like so much of that, but we're absorbing all of that all of the time. And we know that from basic new thought, like, what you think about is what you're going to become. What you focus on is what you're going to create in your life. And it's, you don't need to believe that or not believe it. I mean, that's science. I mean, that's the science of consciousness, So that's one big thing. And part of the reason that I call this book, If You Can Worry, You Can Meditate, is one of the ideas I really wanted to try and get across is that, in essence, when we're thinking, we're just using cognition, when we're using focused awareness, that's meditation of a sort, right? So, but our meditation that we're usually doing is not very good, and that's not to criticize ourselves or to feel guilty, but when you start to watch your mind, you realize how habituated you are to thinking about negativity and worries. And that's why I call it, the worry idea. But if you think about it, you have no trouble worrying about the bills, for example. Like if the bills are due and you don't have the money, and you get caught in that loop of worrying, you could sit there and focus on that for hours and hours and hours and hours, right? But then people will say, but I can't meditate. And it's like, you're meditating all the time. Like my goal with you is to just kind of like wake you up and say, look, break that pattern and put that attention on something positive. Focus on compassion, focus on love, focus on Psalm 23, like you're talking about. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Think about the beautiful quotes of Jesus or Buddha or a quantum physicist that you enjoy or an artist. You don't have to be religious specifically to meditate. You just don't. If you want to think about it as the unconscious mind or the subconscious mind or a different part of yourself or a higher mind, you don't want to put a name to it, whatever, that's cool. And that's the beauty of meditation. Like I said, it doesn't pin you into any kind of corner. Like you're not going to do it wrong. I love the way you said that. There's no like rule book about it. In my book, what I do and what most people who teach meditation do is they give you kind of outlines of how you might approach it because it feels overwhelming. But here's the cool thing is you could just take all that away and just say, hey, I'm not even going to worry about it. I'm not going to try to learn anything. I'm not going to try to do anything. I'm just going to sit for a few minutes and focus on my breath or listen to some music. And by the way, one musician popped into my head when we were talking about music. And this is I do not know this man, but I listen to his music all the time. His name's Steve Halpern, Halp.
Yeah.
Do you know Steve Halpern?
Well, listen, in the
Yeah.
80s, in
Oh my God, he was
1980
huge in the 80s.
in
Yeah.
1986 is when I was introduced to meditation.
I love it.
And those were like the cassettes that we would pass around
Oh
to
my
each
God, I
other.
had those.
Yes,
Yes.
Steve Halpern and the other
Yeah.
Andreas Volta something.
Oh, yes.
I
Yes.
can't even pronounce his last
I couldn't
name.
either. Yeah.
But yeah, those were the guys. Those were the go-to. That was one of the go-to guys. Yes, that's a great recommendation.
He's doing all the cool frequency stuff now, and he's using a lot of subliminal suggestions and things. So he's doing some really cool stuff. So I mean, I usually listen to him either on YouTube or, I mean, he's all over. He's on any of those streaming services. So there's my shameless plug for somebody I don't know but greatly admire. Because like you, I had those cassettes, and I was like, wow, this guy's doing some great stuff. Kind of opens. It does help to open your mind. I really
Yeah.
believe in music. So and that's where I think if you think about, instead of thinking about meditation like this really difficult practice that someone has to teach me how to do, that is something that isn't for the Western mind. Because that's the other thing. We think, oh, that's great for folks in India and Japan and China, because they grew up in a society that values meditation, right? But it's like, we have our own, in the West, by the way, we have our own systems of meditation that are as old as stuff in the East. They're just different, we have a sort of a different mindset, all this rational thinking developed in the West, and in the East, they're more sort of heartfelt and intuitional. If you can put those two things together, then you're really firing on all cylinders. And I think, again, that's what meditation helps you do. So so I don't want to go far afield, and I'll give it right back to you, but especially today, and I know there's a lot of folks that are worried about AI. They're worried about, is my job going to go? They're worried about politics. They're getting all tied up in all these crazy things that are can be stressful. There's another reason why it's so important to take that time to be with yourself, your higher self, your spirit, and clear out all that noise so that you can see clearly through all of this stuff that's out there, and not really, because it's easy to get, blown around like you're like this little sailboat on an ocean, right? The meditation helps you to realize, like, I am the spirit, I am the wind, I am the sailboat. I can ride this out. I can enjoy it. I don't have to, it doesn't have to swamp me. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's probably the reason why I still, after all these years, continue to meditate, twice a day on a daily basis. It's like my anchor, it's
This
my
is, I love this because now it's going into another great direction. And what I want to highlight in this is the more I'm upset and complain about what's upsetting to me going on in the world, I'm actually adding more discord to the consciousness because we are all one. And that's why I love how uh, Carl Jung and you know the the people, the metaphysical movement, the ones that preceded, even Judge Trower, like Emerson, and they all
yeah,
talked
the
about how,
transcendentalists, the early
yeah, the
transcendentalists, right?
transcendentalists,
Yeah.
yeah, and this isn't anything new. It may sound new because we hear it now, but the idea that the bottom line is we're all branches of the same tree. We're all connected. And that's why when you pray or meditate lovingly on someone's behalf, they could be 3,000 miles away. Well, the distance in miles, physical miles, means nothing because we're all connected in this one mind, this one, consciousness. And here's the thing: whenever I'm upset and complaining, it's not just that the people I'm complaining to, you know, is now we're like growing this, yeah, yeah, you're right. That is bad. First of all, I got to remember it feels bad to do that. Like I physically don't feel good, but it's this weird little addiction we've all gotten into because it's just, I mean, the news, you know what I call the news now? Breaking news, the news. I call it gossip for grown-ups because it's all it really is. And the thing is, someone said years ago, God doesn't, when someone was saying, if there's a God, why do we have all these wars? And he says, God doesn't start these wars. Upset people start these wars. And he said, upset people upset the world. So what's the remedy? The remedy is to get like that song, let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. That gives me a responsibility. When I first heard that song, it was about the same time I was introduced to meditation. It gave me, like, so I could participate in this. I'm not always good at it. I complain, but I definitely don't complain as much. My life was all complaint in 1986. Now it's complaint. I feel bad and say, why did you do that? And I like mind myself now. And most of the time, I'm pretty good at not being what I call a newscaster, where I'm sharing negative news I heard, or rather, I call that being a repeat offender because I'm just repeating something I experienced that wasn't good. So now I'm like offending. I'm sharing the offense with other people so they could be offended. And that's like a mass prayer, where two or more are gathered together, and it's really wreaking more havoc. Getting mad at these things wreaks more havoc than I think we want to acknowledge. So that's why meditation, and this is going to be sound like a mind blower, why I believe this so strongly about it affecting the world. My minding my own inner life contrib- has a more powerful contribution than me, you know, trying to write it with aggression. And it was when I was in a military rehabilitation center that, and this was the height of the Cold War, was when I was there. I mean, my one of the things we did back then in the Coast Guard was we would board potential Russian spy ships. I mean, we didn't have the technology we have now. We didn't even have GPS then. We didn't have, we weren't, the internet was just like this little, it was, it was like, I don't even know. We had it in the military, but it was like rarely used for files or anything. It was just like it was almost like the internet then was more like like a modern version of telegraph. You know what I mean? So instead of faxing someone, you could telegraph them. Uh, but it was very rudimentary. So these Russian fishing vessels, sometimes were, you know, listening or doing interesting things. So we would board those. So it was pretty intense, and things looked like they were going to come to a head and it wasn't going to be good. In spite of all that, when I was in the rehabilitation center shortly after that, but it's still going on, but I was no longer assigned to that ship. Um, the Marine gunny sergeants who were frontline guys in Vietnam, like real battle tested infantrymen, are now recommending that I meditate sending love to our enemies. Because I said, yeah, but what about the Russians? And the crazy thing is they understood. They could have easily went, yeah, we can't trust those Russians. They could have easily done that. But these guys were like warrior monks. They were like Jesus in a way. Instead of getting all out there, the gunny sergeant who shared this with me obviously saw, okay, this mind is at dis-ease about this situation. Let me give him a tool, because healing his mind of this will begin to heal the world of it. And he said, well, this is what I suggest. Why don't you get yourself one of those beach balls? Because it was in Hawaii. The rehabilitation center was at Pearl Harbor, and they had beach balls that had the globe on them, the earth and all the countries. Why don't you get one of those, and every morning after your morning routine, why don't you meditate with the globe, hold the globe and imagine God's love coming from you, moving out from Hawaii, across the Pacific, throughout the United States. And as it's moving like this big golden light of joy and love, like you could even see the people in California being affected by it, and enjoying that feeling and loving their children and waving to each other. And now let's go across the Atlantic, to our friends in England and Ireland, and now let's keep going and into Russia. And imagine this lighting them up with their families and their children. My mind was so blown by the irony of the way from who was telling me to do this and that. But more importantly, something inside me, truer than all my little fears and what reality would say, what the news would have you believe, something deep within me, it felt extremely attractive. And two, it felt like right to do that. And I started to do that. And the experience was incredible. Not only that, I was working, my new orders were in a joint task force working with uh, individuals from the other branches of service. So one of the guys I became close with, who I worked with, was a Marine, just happened to be a Marine. And things were getting hotter now because it was like 1988, 89, like, and we didn't know what. And we're hearing stuff that the news didn't even hear. That's even scarier. So that being said, he said, well, do you think we're going to end up going to war with Russia? This was just like on an aside, to each other. And I said, no, I don't think so. I just felt so like it felt so true. He goes, really? Why? And I said, I don't think the Russians want to go to war either. And he was like, I never thought about it like that. And it changed his that, but that was, I couldn't have thought that way. Or I would, if I said that, I would be just, if I hadn't been meditating, I mean, I was grounded in that thought when I shared that with him. It felt true. I knew it to be true. And then, a year later, things changed dramatically. You know, the wall came down and everything
Sure.
kind of diffused for a while.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting because a couple of things occurred to me when we were talking. So you talked about Jung earlier, Carl Jung. One of the things he said to speak to that is that after World War II, and then we had dropped the bomb on Japan and so on, and there was a lot of fear of atomic bombs and so on, and there was the Cold War starting, and we were afraid of the Russians. There's just fears, right? So a lot of people were asking Jung, what do you make of all this, and do you think we're going to survive, and what do you think we need to do, and this and that, and he had this really interesting thought. He just said, if enough people become conscious, we'll be okay. And he tried to I think what he was doing there, it's like a really simple statement, but what I think he was doing there is bringing it back to kind of what you were talking about, where it's like, we think that the world's events are like this top down thing. And we feel like we don't have any control or any connection to it. And, what you said, we're all interconnected. Our thoughts, our prayers, our intentions, our ideas, they matter, and they can make a great amount of difference in the situation. And our own level of consciousness that we're bringing to the table at any given time does affect the world around us, and it affects the world in general.
Yeah.
And I think we know from quantum physics, when we talk about the situation with entanglement and all these different things that are going on behind the scenes in that quantum world, that that kind of proves some of these theories out. But just spiritually speaking, I think we know this, and the more that we spend time in the quiet, in a meditative state, focusing on love, focusing on compassion, sending that out to other people, it makes great changes. And, they did this study for many years. I think it's still ongoing. There's a university out in Iowa, and I actually spent some time out there for a little while, called Maharishi University, started by Maharishi, the TM folks, right? And they did this study, and they set up meditators in very violent cities across the US. And they would have a certain number, and they had the scientific ratio they were using, and they would meditate on peace in the city and see if it made any difference. And they have conclusive scientific evidence that a bunch of people sitting around meditating on peace actually brought the crime rates down in all the cities they were in. And, I guess you could say, oh, it's a statistic anomaly and this and that, whatever. But I mean, year after year after year, you can see this drop. And then when they stopped, it went back up. So, these our thoughts are things, like Napoleon Hill said, what we think about, we become, as a man thinketh in his heart. All these things from all these traditions keep coming up over and over and over again. And they relate back to how we use our mind, and how we direct our thoughts. And meditation, a formal practice of it, however simple it is, helps us to get back to kind of, I don't want to say controlling, but directing those thoughts, directing that stream of energy. And then also simultaneously getting in that flow of spirit, like you were talking about, where I don't feel like I necessarily have to use my ego to power through everything. If it feels so difficult, I'm probably doing something that's not in my wheelhouse, or something that's not quite right.
Yeah.
And and listen to the world when it's feeding you back information. There's two things can be happening. One, you need to have more perseverance and just push through. Or two, you're doing something wrong. Do you know what I mean? And not morally speaking, but just it's not the right thing for you. And sometimes, again, meditation, like you were talking about your artwork and so on, and trusting yourself and getting into that space where I let things move me. When there's so much noise, we shut down our higher angels, our greater impulses, our creativity, and so on. And we act like, well, if only I had this much money or this much time or this much, or this person told me I was good at this. We create all these ridiculous artificial impediments to our own creativity and our own happiness. And it's unnecessary, right? So you can go straight into the heart of creativity, straight into the heart of happiness with meditation. I don't need someone else to help me. I just go right in, right? And so those are things that kind of came up as you were talking. And, that's, I wanted to share that with you.
This is very exciting. I got two things. One thing came up when you were sharing, and actually Rick Rubin mentions it in his book. It's a quote by Oscar Wilde. Some things are too important to take seriously. And Rick Rubin goes on to say, and art is one of them. And it's almost everything that we think is important should not be taken seriously. Serious is me letting fear-based problem solve. I'm cutting myself totally off from any sort of intuitive or higher. I like the other word for God, super consciousness, or infinite wisdom. When I'm coming at something, I think I got to take this seriously. It's just saying that is fear. It means I got to reason this out all on my, without realizing I'm affirming this. I'm basically saying I got to reason this out all on my own. It's awful. And it doesn't work. It does not work. It's like, I'm going to tell you how a very serious thing is drowning. Okay. Can't we all agree that that's pretty serious? You don't know how to swim and you're panicked, you're going to drown. And learning how to rescue people in the Coast Guard, the biggest thing is to learn is number one, if you relax, you will not sink, you will not drown, you will float. Knowing this helped us know that if we ever got overboard, we don't need to panic. We don't need to overly exert ourselves treading water because we'll just exhaust ourselves, but to relax. And we would do exercises and how to do what was called a dead man's float. And you could do it for hours. It's basically being in a meditative state. That being said, the first job when approaching a drowning person is to convince them that they're going to be okay if they just relax and let me help them. The more they take it serious and the more they panic, the more not only do they ensure their own drowning, but I might get drowned with them if they grab a hold of me. So even like, because some intellectually my brain go, yeah, but some things, bills and this and that. Yeah. What's more serious than drowning? Is a bill really more serious than drowning? No. So if drowning, you need to not take so serious. I mean, you got to relax and you have to trust that you're going to be okay. And you will be, especially if there's someone like me coming to get you. Trust them. When they say, calm down, I'm here to help.
I'm here.
Yeah. So, but also, I like the fact that all this, like the time spent in meditation, is such a game changer because it really does. If you are like, I had a lot, I could have probably been diagnosed with many different psychological conditions in 1986 had they had different, diagnoses or even names for these things, PTSD is a real condition. ADHD is a condition, anxiety as a condition. And if at that time they had what they use now, different types of medications, but they just didn't. And in a way, I'm grateful because at the rehabilitation center, we were all different. I mean, they just threw all the misfit toys into this one place. And it was vitamins, exercise. We were in barracks like boot camp, and group group therapy, but based on spiritual principles, not Christian principles, not Buddhist, not any one particular philosophy, but on like what we're sharing here. I mean, it's a miracle that the military was doing this at that time, because that's where I learned that's where I became open to all these ideas, and it's transformed my existence. And I like how meditating, don't expect, I just want to put this out there. You don't have to expect even feeling different in the meditation. That doesn't mean it's not working. Because later on, you're going to notice how you're aware of things you weren't really aware of before. Like your intuition is going to be louder. You're going to recognize it quicker. Um, and you go, well, I don't know. I don't know if I have intuition. Do men have intuition? I thought it was women's intuition. Well, listen, you may not call it intuition, but you probably called it, I had a feeling I should have done that, or I had a feeling I shouldn't have done that. Well, that's what we're talking about, folks. That's another word for intuition. And so sometimes I'm doing meditation and I feel so good, like better than any drug. And it's almost like time goes by like that. Other times I'm sitting there, I'm like, it's got to be 15 minutes by now. And, but I go, that's okay. The buzzer didn't go off. Yeah, but are you sure you set the timer? Don't worry, it's set. God's in charge. And the buzzer will go off and it'll feel like, oh, I really didn't get into a blissful state. But you know what? If you do push-ups every morning, your spirituality and charging your phone, you know, it's like a muscle. It's your spiritual part of you is like a muscle. If I do push-ups every day, some days I might be hearing the theme from Rocky. Other days, well, I got to do my 25 push-ups. It doesn't matter what happens. I'm going to get stronger and healthier. And the same thing is with this spiritual part of you. And the spiritual part of us is the biggest part of us. There's a guy, one of these mystics. God, I wish I remembered. He might even not have been a mystic. And I just saw this quote where he said, the biggest part of you, is Buckminster Fuller. Buckminster Fuller. So Google this somehow, my paraphrasing, and you'll probably get the actual quote, which is probably more condensed and to the point. But he was basically saying, the part of us that we cannot see is the biggest part of us. And he's talking about this spiritual part.
Yeah, and he was. I would say he was a mystic, even though he was an inventor and a philosopher and all. I don't think he'd probably call himself that, but he definitely has the vibes of a mystic. One cool
Yes.
thing about him that you probably know, he had this idea about himself. And Buckminster Fuller, for those folks who might not know, he was an architect and an inventor, very creative individual. Look, yeah, definitely Google him because he's not as well known as he was like in the 80s and 70s and 80s and 90s, but a genius. But he had this idea where he looked at his life and he called himself guinea pig B. Like his whole life was an experiment, like a science experiment. He would like observe things and he wouldn't be too harsh with himself and he would take note of what was going on and he would think, well, how is guinea pig B doing in this particular situation? And it's an interesting way to kind of take your ego out of it, to look at life like it really is an experiment. And I think that's one of the things that meditation does for you. It really does, like you said, it is somewhat analogous to like a workout, because you do it, and some workouts are good and some you feel like Rocky at the end of it, or a UFC fighter. Some of them you feel like a skinny little wimp and you're just like, how did I even get through that? Some days you're limping through it, some days so but you keep showing up. And I heard once, then this really stuck with me, that the process of meditation and the process of spiritual work in general, any of it really, any ritual work and affirmations and anything related to that, it's a cumulative process. It's like dipping a white cloth into dye. It's like I'm dipping white cloth into yellow dye, let's say. Every single time I dip that cloth in, it gets darker and more color fast. It stays, right? So I keep dipping, keep dipping, keep dipping. And one day I've got this beautiful yellow garment that I didn't realize, it was white before and now it's yellow. So there you go. And it's going to stay like that. But you do have to kind of stay in that process. You'll get it to a certain level and you'll think, well, this is it. This is where I'm at. And now I can stop. It's not really like that. You have to kind of keep going. But it does have this cumulative effect where, like you said, one day you'll be sitting there and, oh, my intuition is stronger. You might call it something else. Maybe it's a gut feeling. Oh, yeah. I'm feeling more creative. And so for some people, oh, it's not drawing like you, but their creativity is, oh, I picked a really nice picture for the living room. That there's a creativity to that. I wouldn't normally do that. And it looks really good. I didn't know I could do that. You know what I'm saying? It's those sorts of things where you kind of just don't even realize, like, oh, wow, I'm not having panic attacks. I'm not depressed and suicidal. Yeah. I'm not like totally anxious anymore. My life is on track. Yeah, there's ups and downs and this and that, but it's, you know what I'm saying? You don't go back. You get to a certain level and you realize, like, wow, this has really changed my consciousness and my life fundamentally. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You remind me of a saying I heard early on. There's only two things you need to know about meditation, folks. This is them. One is you need to start, and two, you need to continue. You got to continue. Here's an interesting experience just this week where meditation and doing this practice helps me let go instead of pushing when I know this isn't like there's a different. This is one of the biggest advantages. It's given me the clear of a very healthy way within myself to I recognize when it's something I need to follow through on that I'm procrastinating. So that's I need to push myself through it. Or it's something I think I ought to do, that sort of like push and shove. Like there's a difference. And it's like you mentioned it early on in the show, knowing when it's time to persevere and when it's time to go, wait, this isn't for me. So at the beginning of this week, I got asked to be on a little 3-minute segment on a drive time radio show to talk about the book. And leading up to it, I was kind of going, what's the point even talking about this book anymore? I mean, this is how crazy my mind gets. And the book I'm talking about is The Great Seal, The Symbolic Guide for Happy and Successful Living, because we're coming up to the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence of our country, the birth of the nation. So just like you were talking about earlier about I should be prepared. And I started to feel like stress over being prepared. I go, Darryl, you know this. Just you're talking to a friend. So I, looked it over a little bit just so I would be awake, and not struggling in my mind. And, it was over the phone and, okay, stand by 30 seconds and it's live. And these guys are drive-by guys. Hey, so, but I was able, the main thing is after it was over, I was like, wow, I was able to accomplish that. It was such a great feeling. So then later on the day, I'm thinking, well, I got to keep this going now. See, now I know this is that feeling of pushing and shoving. And if you talk to the wrong people, they'll let you know, oh yeah, you got to keep the momentum. You got to now start sending out to other but I could feel, no, this is not magnetic because I'm coming from fear. I'm coming from lack. I'm coming from, I got to keep this going. I'm not trusting the universe. And that makes me repulsive instead of magnetic or attractive. I'm repelling. And I know this now because I can feel it. So I had to say, stop it. You don't need to let it go. But the little whirly mind, yeah, but these other success coaches say, now's the time, seize the moment. I just know it's not good for me. What
Yeah.
happens? Later that day, I get an email, like a CC email from the content manager of the station. And he had sent an email to one of the radio shows, the national radio shows that they syndicate at his station. It said, we had this guest on. It was great. I think you might, consider him. And I was like, see, Daryl, back off. You don't need to do any. You don't need to push and shove. But to help me, I had to keep meditating on the idea, like throughout the day when it would come, I'll go, no, God's my publicist. God's my marketer. I just need to be creative and do the inspired next right thing, not the ought to. So, that being said, the next day I started thinking I got to push and shove again. So
Every
I
day.
yeah,
It's
so
a
I had to,
struggle. Yeah.
yeah, because I was like, hi, oh wow, now he sent this letter, and I had to go, no, no, stop it, and I really just backed off and just started enjoying. No, I'm gonna let God take care of this. The day after that, letting it go again, I get an email from the Surface Navy Association. Now, this is so serendipitous. After meditating last year, I got the hunch to go to Long Beach just by myself for Fleet Week, you know? And it's like, who goes to Fleet Week? Right? Fleet Week, just so you know, it's when all the ships come in. Like the big joke is the only people that show up for Fleet Week, like it's when the Navy comes into port and they bring in their vessels and they open them up for people to see their ships, and there's these vendors and the sailors go on leave, and it's usually San Diego, Long Beach, San Francisco, New York City, Pearl Harbor. And the big joke is, that's where all the ladies and the gay community rush to, is Fleet Week. So what's a straight guy going to do at Fleet Week? That's the joke. But anyway, I had this hunch. I even told Lori, I said, I think I'm going to go down to Fleet Week. She goes, Fleet Week? I go. And just waddling around, having a decent time, I saw the young Coast Guard guys, and I'm like, holy cow, I was so young. Like, it gave me this wholesome feeling, I just felt so good about it. And then they had the battleship, the Iowa. You could check it out, go aboard it. So as I'm walking up it, a Coast Guard officer's walking down on the other side of the gangplank, and there's a railing between us. I said, holy cow. I said, I was in the Coast Guard. Like, I just came out and said it. We hit it off. He asked what I did while I was in, and I did, unique, fun, interesting work that's not really, most people don't do in the Coast Guard. Like I said, that task force and stuff. And so we hit it off, and he goes, hey, we're having a special cocktail party for all the new officer cadets that are on the Eagle. The Eagle is this massive sailing vessel, like it's from the 19th century that the Coast Guard has. And it's like the officers that go to officer school in Connecticut for the Coast Guard, they have to sail this, wind vessel. They sailed it already all the way to Long Beach from, it's in Connecticut is where this ship is. They sail it to Hawaii. So I said, really? And then I said, dress like this because I had a T-shirt and shorts on, or a polo shirt and shorts. He goes, yeah. So I go and we start talking, and he says, you should join the Surface Navy Association. It's for people who are in the Navy or Coast Guard, people are in it. It's like, like this real fraternal order of, and I never really was like, I never really consider myself of a military, like fraternal. Like I'm not one of those, but I am a veteran. I'm proud of it. I feel more grateful than proud. But anyway, I said, all right, it's $25 a year. And I forgot all about this, and I'll get back to what I forgot. But the very next day after pushing and shoving, I get a email from the Service Navy Association. They have a quarterly newsletter that they send to all the members. And it said, where your article is, thank you for contributing your article. It's in review for publication in our summer issue. I'm like, wait, I sent them an article? And I remembered when the last newsletter came out, I'm looking through it and it said, call for articles, submissions. So I submitted an article on the Great Seal and how these principles that are in the Great Seal, if you don't know what the Great Seal of the United States is, it's on the back of every dollar bill, the front and the reverse of it. Those weird symbols, the pyramid with the floating eye. So I associated each of the principles with our virtues or our ideals, for sailors. And I had sent it in. And the next day after that, they said, hey, we're going to publish it. Please send some corresponding imagery. So I sent the back of the dollar bill and the cover of my book. I figured that's good enough. But here's the thing. I was like, holy cow. And that was a good reminder, because the only reason like this Surface Navy thing came wasn't because I pushed and shoved. It's because something came to me in my mailbox and it had, an invitation. And I just followed through on the delightful invitation. And that's how it just made everything, like it reassured me, because now I'm totally off even considering pushing and shoving. But it's just miraculous, the divine order, because it was like you said, like Buckminster Fuller, this big experiment. If I'm experimenting with spiritual principles in my life, well, look, I really consider when these things happen. I go, see, Daryl, you don't need to push and shove. If an invitation comes to you and it feels delightful, follow through. If not, it's not for you. You're fighting, you're struggling, and the universe is harmonious. And that's what meditation does. It gets me so aware of being in this healthy, harmonious frequency, or what's often referred to by Eric Butterworth as the positive stream of life, that when my mind starts taking me out of it, I either have to really work hard at justifying why this is a good idea, or hopefully just go, surrender. I'm going back into the positive. And when we surrender, I'm not giving up. It means, nope, surrender back to the positive stream, back in the positive stream of life.
That's a beautiful, beautiful way to put it. And I think part of it that what really kind of sticks out for me when you're talking about that, it goes again back to seeing those serendipitous and what Jung would call synchronicity type events, where like these coincidences, but they're meaningful and they're a little bit too on target to be random. What I mean? And so so he called it a synchronicity. And I think that's such a fascinating word, and the idea of paying attention to that. And another one of his ideas too, and along those lines, was that the more we're in the correct flow, the more we're in what he called our individuation process, us, connecting to the higher self, connecting to the self, and being who we truly are, the more those synchronous events will unfold. Yeah. And the more that you pay attention to them, the more that you see them, the more that you respond to them and you say yes to them. And then meditation becomes a base for kind of recognizing that, right? This is a totally non sequitur in a lot of ways. But so your Great Seal, before we got on the show, we talked a little bit about your book, The Great Seal, and you were talking about Paul Foster Case. And I, in my book, thank Paul Foster Case, because he's like one of my favorite all-time esoteric teachers, deep, deep, deep thinker. and pretty obscure. People really don't know his work, but he was here in Los Angeles and he really went deep into New Thought. He went deep into tarot, deep into astrology, Kabbalah, like really esoteric subject. And his book, The Great Seal, is probably smaller than yours, but that thing, I mean, it takes hours and hours and hours to dig through it. Every sentence and every paragraph, or like you got to unpack so much information, right? And so I think what you were trying to do is extract out stuff for like the rest of us who just want, just kind of give me a little bit more of an overview, right? But I have this on my desk and I always look at this. This is this cube of space, it's called. This is Paul Foster Case's tarot deck that he designed. And this is kind of a Kabbalistic, let's call it, map of creation or explanation of how existence, the material world, comes into play, right? So I was kind of just looking at that thing as you were talking. I'm listening, but I'm looking at it like, wait a minute, there's a Paul Foster Case connection. Wait a minute, we talked about Paul Foster Case. Wait a minute, you have a Great Seal book. You start to see all these, not to be conspiracy theories, but you're like, wait, there's a lot of stuff going on that oftentimes we don't see. And if we don't pay attention and we don't do some form of meditation, we miss a lot of that. And when we miss it, it's like, then we're looking for someone else to validate us. We're looking for a sign that's going to drop out of the sky. And it's like, spirit is like sending messages all the time. It's like, meditation helps us to kind of tune in to those messages. They're there. They're like all around you. But oftentimes you just, I don't see that. Or, that's just a coincidence. Is it? I mean, you don't really know. And so until you look at it, unpack it, follow it, say yes to it, like you're saying, like this thing comes up, I say yes, I see where it goes. I don't need to force everything so like heavily, right? I think those are big things that, like, in the moment, having talks like this and allowing things to unfold instead of overly preparing like you did for your 3-minute thing, or for me with this, I was tempted to like really, like reread my book and like make sure I made notes because I don't want to fall on my face or whatever. So much of that's just like our own crazy insecurities and our, you know what I mean? And I think with the more meditation and prayer or contemplation, whatever you really want to call it, the more time spent in the quiet, listening to our own thoughts, listening for spirit, listening for infinite intelligence, the better our life functions. It's very, very, very practical. It's not just something for monks or for yogis or for whoever that we think is some disconnected spiritual entity that doesn't have to participate in paying bills and living, complicated lives. All the more do we need it if we're experiencing that kind of stuff. It's like, in a way, monks and people that are cloistered away could get away with not doing meditation because they're in a controlled little peaceful environment. We're out there in the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned your book, and I want to let people know again, I highly recommend, I don't care if you're experienced with meditation like myself, or you're very new or just interested. I mean, this is the book to get. If you can worry, you can meditate, because it's such an easy, reassuring read. I love it. And I can't believe it fell off the shelf after meditating and letting go of, I guess I'm not going to do a show this weekend. That's fine. It's Memorial Day weekend. And then this falls out. I go, and the hunch, well, ask Jason. And part of me's like, well, you haven't talked to him in a while. You're going to ask him to be on the show. Shouldn't this like maybe delay it? No, just do it. And here we are today. That reminded me of something. What was it? And now it's like kind of disappearing from my. Oh, one of the things you mention and highlight in the book is the fact that, yeah, we have this weird belief. Most people, before I was introduced to meditation, as something practical. That's what got me hooked. Is they think it's something for weirdos or show offs or, people wearing hemp only. And it's not. Matter of fact, and this is what I want to refer to in the book. I think you even mention how you'd be surprised to find out that some of the most successful people meditate or throughout history have meditated. You know, even the founding fathers, they were deists. I mean, they believed that there was they weren't, many of them were not, they didn't believe in the dogma of organized religion, but they believe that there's this universal power. It operates by law. And if we cooperate with that law, and how do we cooperate? With moral responsibility. They equated it with moral responsibility. And how do we know that? Well, we're following our conscience. Is this the right thing to do? Our conscience knows. It says, no, I don't think we should be doing this. That's not the voice of a coward. That's actually the voice of God. Matter of fact, Latin, conscience from Latin means with knowing, with knowledge. It's in here. So I like that you mentioned that. I wanted to let people know that it's not just for weirdos or people who are cloistered from life. Some of the greatest people in history who have contributed significantly to humanity have meditated. Artists, many of the great artists meditated. Musicians meditated. Rick Rubin, meditator. Most of this book on the creative act is about tapping into this source. And what blew me away, and goes to the cloistered idea and not being cloistered, it was the last week at that rehabilitation center. And on the last week, we were given a pass, to not have to stay at the center for the last weekend. And then we come back and we graduate. Or, then we go back to our regular job, our duty station. There wasn't a graduation. It's like, okay, guys, here's your orders back. So, fun's over. Summer camp is done. But here's the thing. That's how maybe some of the people viewed it who didn't dive in like I did. But what happened to me is on that weekend, I was back in the world. I wasn't at the center. And I couldn't believe how everything had changed. And when I got back, I told one of the counselors there, like one of the other, like I said, it was all run by military guys. This one happened to be a Navy petty officer. It was Marine petty officer, Marine gunny sergeants, and Navy chiefs and petty officers. So I said, Lavelle, and we were allowed to use first names in there. So I said, Lavelle. He goes, so how was your weekend? Everything go well? And I said, Lavelle, it's just like in here, out there. My mind had changed so much just from the meditation and these spiritual ideas in this short, it was like 4 weeks. And you know what he said? He said, Daryl, it's always been like here, out there. And it was the biggest lesson in as within, so without. Like my first, the idea in my mind, my vague newcomer idea of what was happening was, it was like the security of, that none of my problems are here in this recovery center. And they helped, they said, Daryl, whatever you got going on out there, you're not going to bring it in here. Don't even think about it while you're here. That alone is a meditative practice. So then I go out and it's like 90% of those problems weren't even existing anymore without me doing anything. And it helped me realize, holy cow, it's not just a place. It really is an inside job. And that's what this whole thing is about.
Yeah. And it's amazing too. Two things came up when you were talking about that. One was one time I went to a meditation retreat. It was quite long actually. It was up in it was up at the Ananda Ashram in outside of Sacramento, and I was doing my meditation teacher training there, and we were also doing like silent meditations and so on this whole time. But I remember by the end of this thing, it's just pretty blissed out by the whole experience. And you're eating Ayurvedic vegetarian food, and you're sleeping really well, and there's like very little distractions, and there's no outside world, right? I remember when I got out of this thing, and I was driving home, and it's kind of way off the freeway. It's like 2 hours off the freeway or something. So it's a long, slow drive to get to the freeway. And I remember when I got on the freeway, how fast everything seemed for like the moment, right? And I literally had to kind of pull off and kind of catch my breath. But it's so interesting. Like once I kind of got back into that flow, I realized like, oh, this is kind of like what my mind was doing before. And now it's just shocking to me. Like there's so much movement, everything's so fast. Like, it took 5, 10, 15 minutes. I got back into the flow of things. But it was really interesting to recognize like that's always been out there like that.
Yeah.
This has always been in here like this. It's just that for a period of time, I slowed it all down, and now it kind of changed the way that I look at everything. And it's substantially different now. And then you have this other idea too, which I think is really, really interesting. It's like the idea of the Zen masters that would tell people like, well, what's meditation like? Or not meditation, but what's like enlightenment like? Well, to get to enlightenment, first of all, you have to do all the hard work, chop wood and carry water. Okay, well then once I get to enlightenment, what happens then? Well, you chop wood and carry water. And it's like, okay. It's just the process, It's the
Yeah.
process. And so you stay in it. Just like you said, you gotta start the meditation, you gotta continue the meditation. Life is gonna happen one way or the other. It's gonna unfold. We're gonna have things are gonna happen. Whether or not we choose to kind of enjoy it and find creativity and find, by the way, I'm not growling. I've got a chihuahua here. I'm trying to keep quiet. So I apologize for that. But the more you do those practices, then it shapes your life in a different way. You have some of the same experiences, but then, like you said, a lot of the things just drop away. You
Yeah.
realize you just don't need to fight anymore. You don't need to carry that around anymore. You've been dragging this heavy load of baggage behind you. You're just like, oh wait, I can just let go of that.
Wow.
You know what I mean? It's really free. It's really free. But that process helps you to get the confidence to let go.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes. Well, we can go on forever and
Yeah,
ever. And I want to have you back on. We got to do this
that'd be
again.
amazing. I'm
So,
I'm so glad we followed synchronicity and serendipity into a great podcast. Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate it.
I am just blown away and thrilled that you said yes. Not only when I asked you, but then, well, how about tomorrow, 11 a.m. till noon? And you're like, yeah. I'm like, all
Let's
right,
do it.
man. This
Let's
was
do it.
meant to be. I can't believe it.
I love it.
So, once again, folks, thanks for being a part of funniest thing. And if you're not already meditating, we gave you lots of simple ways you can try to begin. One thing we didn't mention that's available is there's guided meditations everywhere, free on YouTube. And you could even be specific with the length of time and the type of guided meditation. So have fun with that. You could start off small. Most of all, uh, whether you've been doing this practice for years or you're just brand new, I highly recommend, if you can worry, you can meditate, by Jason Napolitano. Napolitano.
There you go.
How can I
You
not
got it.
say this?
Napolitano. You got it.
Napolitano.
You got it.
I'm losing it.
They're
I've been
not.
living in
You're not, man.
California.
You got it. You're hanging on.
So, that being said, thanks for everything. Also, I did mention, I think I actually, yeah, we mentioned both books. I have two new books: The Great Seal, The Symbolic Guide for Happy and Successful Living, and also Step Out Boldly, The Hidden Meaning of the Statue of Liberty. The one on the Statue of Liberty comes with a personal declaration of independence included that you can sign. So those are available on Amazon. And thanks again for joining us. And we'll see you next week with a new episode of Funniest Thing.